A woman prays at a mountain shrine. A lifeless child lifted from the earth. An old man walks with difficulty. He has only one leg. Two people who survived one of the heaviest bombing campaigns in history.
เครียดแค้นหลายเพราะว่าแม่หันก็ยังน้อยเราครอบครัวหันตายหมดแล้วเวลานั้นละสงครามแห้งแม่ก็โอ้เจ็บใจ
ไอ้นับแต่นั้นลงหัวจนหัวอันทำบอลเฮาจะเข้ากระเตือทำกลางคานมันยิงเม็ดมือเลยยิงอันนั้น
They were amongst more than 20,000 people who sought shelter from an almost ceaseless bombardment inside a remote network of caves in the mountains of northern Laos. A complex of 480 caverns and tunnels at a place called Vieng Sai. They built a hidden city where people lived, worked and slept for 9 years. During the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s, the Pathet Lao, a communist insurgency in Laos, offered support to Vietnamese communists who were fighting the United States. They opened a supply route through Laos called the Ho Chi Minh Trail to deliver arms and food to anti-American forces. Though Laos was neutral, the US military decided that made the Pathet Lao a legitimate target. American aircraft dropped 260 million bombs on Laos between 1964 and 1973. It was the equivalent of one B-52 bomber load every 8 minutes. Bombs fell more often than rain. Boon Sue is now 78 and a grandfather, but in the war he was a soldier, and for 5 years he fought in the jungle and lived in the caves. One day, on the 25th of February 1969, the planes came and he couldn't make it inside quickly enough. He was hit by rocket fire. We took him back to the place where it happened, the first time he'd returned in 45 years.
คนถึงหลายมดอยู่นั่นทหารพนักงานอย่างโอ้ย่นมาแล้วก็พากัน
เตรียมพากันแล่น
พากันแดน
ประตูก็แล่นคือกัน
แดนขึ้นเมื่อแดนขึ้นเมื่อยังประมาณปานนี้จะลงหูสำลูกศรมันยิ่งตรงเต็งผุนยิ่งเต็งผุนมีหินมาแตกซ่ามามีงูหินนึงแต่ไม่แตกมาทึกตั้งนี้มันจึงมาเข้า
Signs of the US assault can be seen to this day. Round holes drilled into the rock where rockets hit but failed to explode. Bomb craters, overgrown but still visible. Giant boulders strewn around, brought crashing down by high explosive. During the war, the caves became the Pathet Lao's headquarters. Leaders planned their resistance. Men and women trained to defend their communities. They made clothing to wear. Newspapers and books were produced so people knew what was happening outside. For the young, there were schools. Inside this vast cave network, people lived in constant fear of the bombardment above. Outside, whole mountainsides were being brought down, farms and houses flattened. Inside, some caves did collapse and people were buried alive, but most were able to endure and survive. Today, Boon Sue lives a simple life, but he's haunted by his memories.
จากนั้นมาแล้วก็มันยิงเรียนติดมาแล้วก็เอิ้นมาล้อว่าแม่นอาทิตย์นึงนั่นมันเฮ็ดนั่นมันประชาชนนี่มันประชาชนบ้านหางร้องมันตายหลายตายอยู่โรงหมอทหารหั่นนะ
Sipan was a teenager in the war. His family moved into the caves in 1970 after their home was bombed. His grandmother, grandfather and aunt were killed. He lived underground for 2 years, but still carried on his studies to be a teacher. He remembers conditions were harsh.
แล้วระยะดำรงชีวิตอยู่ในธรรมว่าวสร้างร่วมแต่พนักงานทั่วไปทั้งหมดแม่นดำรงชีวิตในธรรมแม่นว่ามีความยุ่งยากหลายยุ่งยากทางนั้นนะยุ่งยากนึงเจ้ามุ้ยผ้าห่มก็เป็นผ้าห่มเสื้อน่วมก็มันบ่มีเครื่องรับใช้เจ้าน่ะแล้วกันกินกันอยู่ส่วนหลายก็แม่นว่า ไปหาเก็บผักหาหน่อมากินเท่านั้น
As more and more people took to the caves, food became even more scarce.
โซเวียตจีนมองโกเป็นปองแกะบ่ปองป้าบ่จำนวนนึงล่าสุดหลายจำนวนพ่อหันก็มาซุมน้ำหมายปองแกะปองนึงปองป้าปองนึงต่อมัน 6-7 คนหลังจากนั้นเจ้าตะเก็บผักหาหน่อมากินเซอ
They prepared for whatever might come. Gas attack was a constant fear. This was one of many emergency rooms. It could be sealed off and fresh air pumped in from outside. When people were in the caves hiding from the bombs, were they able to communicate with each other?
Yeah, each cave they used the telephone to connect together. Yeah.
And they ran a line between each cave?
Yeah.
How did they know that it was a friend calling and not the enemy?
Well, they have to different number from each department.
And every cave had its own code name, secret word?
Yeah. Hospital and some factory, like a movie theater, the cave fixing the car, the school. Yeah.
It was a whole city?
The whole city, yes.
Whilst the world watched the war being fought in neighbouring Vietnam, the bombing in Laos was carried out in secret. The American public and even parts of the government were not allowed to know what was being done here. This is the cave of Tam Pyu. It is infamous in Laos. During the bombing, it was used as a hospital, school and shelter for families from nearby villages. On the 24th of November 1968, at 3:15 in the afternoon, 2 US fighter jets fired 3 rockets into the cave, killing all 374 men, women and children inside. It was the biggest single loss of life during the bombing in Laos. The blackening of the walls is from the explosions. What remained of the victims is buried in these mass graves on the hillside. At the time, Bua was 17. She'd gone outside the cave to help her aunt, whose home had been bombed.
มีแม่แล้วก็แม่เฒ่ามีน้องสาวหัน2คนแล้วน้องชายก็มี2คนอันตายอยู่นี่แล้วก็มีหมู่อันอยู่ครอบครัวหันก็มีหลายๆครอบครัวเนาะแล้วอันหมู่สนิทแท้ก็ผู้หญิงคือเดียวหันละแม่นมี
But rather than break Bua's spirit, it merely hardened her resolve.
ความเจ็บใจนี่มีอยากต่อสู้เฮานี่เจ็บใจแห้งแล้วเฮาอยากต่อสู้แล้วจิแพ้เฮาอยากเฮ็ด
The anniversary of the attack is now Laos's Day of Remembrance. And if the years of bombardment weren't enough, there is another legacy of war. 1/3 of all the explosives dropped on Laos failed to detonate, leaving the country strewn with 80 million unexploded bombs. 2/3 have still not been cleared. In a country where 4 out of 5 people farm the land, more than 1/3 of agricultural areas are unsafe. At the current rate, it will take 100 years to clear the soil. A charity which cares for the injured says since the bombing ended in 1973, there have been 20,000 more casualties. Even now, it says, someone is killed or injured almost every day.
As a lot of bombs that's still remaining, what we are thinking is try to tell people as much as we can. A lot of people, they don't know about Laos. A lot of people might know about Vietnam or Cambodia, but no Laos. So we try on our best to let people know, and we just hopefully in the future we will get more help from outside to help Laos. Also helping not only the bomb survivors, help Laos for put some more support for clearing.
The US kept their bombing of Laos secret, even from their own people, for 6 years. It was 1970 before it was made public. Even when the war was over, Laos remained isolated, and what happened here was largely forgotten by the outside world. But not for those like Boon Su. He and others now want to tell their stories of resistance.
สงครามของอเมริกาเนี่ยพวก รู้สึกว่าหนึ่งก็แม่นมีน้ำเจอเสียดนั่นแหละเครียดเศร้าหันอันนั้นสองมาก็รู้สึกว่าอเมริกานี่มันเฮ็ดนี่มันบ่แม่นเฮ็ดแต่เวียดบ่แม่นเฮ็ดแต่ลาวความจริงมันมงเจอมันก็อยากเฮ็ดทั่วโลกหั่นเด้อมันอยากทำลายเม็ดทั่วโลกที่ประเทศสังคมนิยมของเฮา
In 2012, Hillary Clinton became the first US Secretary of State to visit Laos in 57 years. The US has provided around $70 million to help clear unexploded bombs. Clinton herself said they must do more. Laos is also cooperating in the search for the remains of 575 Americans still listed as missing in action. Casualty figures from the US bombing remain vague. Lists were not kept. Numbers quoted vary from 20,000 to 200,000. But there's little doubt, without this astonishing network of underground caves, it would have been so many more. For Assignment Asia, I'm Martin Lowe at the Vieng Sai Caves in northern Laos.